I want to invite you to pause for a moment. Imagine you are sitting in a bright room surrounded by familiar faces. Someone greets you with a smile, their voice warm and friendly. But then, for just a moment, you sense something is not real. A glance that avoids your eyes, a handshake that feels too firm, almost as if trying to prove something. Have you ever felt the sense that behind the smile, a knife may be sharpening, waiting for the right moment? I've lived through more than 60 winters, and one thing I've learned is this. The most dangerous person in the room is not the one shouting in your face. It's the one sitting quietly smiling while calculating every step you take. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor of Rome, reminded himself each morning, "Today I will meet liars, traitors, and selfish men, not to hate them, but to prepare my mind." That's Stoic wisdom, not to fuel hatred, but to stay ready. One of my patients, a woman around 55, once told me, "Doctor, I've lost too much trust. The person I thought was my friend ended up spreading my private stories everywhere." I saw pain in her eyes, but I also saw an opportunity. I said to her, "What you're going through is not an ending. It's a reminder to observe more carefully, to listen more deeply, and most of all, to hold peace inside your heart, because that inner peace no one can steal from you." Have you noticed this? In life, deceivers are rarely strangers. They're often those closest to us. You cannot avoid them completely, but you can learn to see through the mask. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not only to face deceit, but to remain steady, unshaken, no matter who tries to deceive us. Remember this, a truth does not need decoration. It stands alone, clear and simple. But a lie is different. It needs color details and endless words. Have you ever heard someone turn a simple question into a full-blown speech? You ask, "Where were you last night?" The honest person says, "I was home." But the liar? Oh, they can't stop. Well, I got home at 9:37, cooked some pasta, watched Netflix. My phone battery dropped to 12%. Oh, and I texted Jake, you can ask him. Lies cannot survive silence. They fear observation. A former colleague of mine once exposed himself this way. During weekly meetings, the boss would ask simply, "How was this week?" Some replied directly, "We closed 2 deals." But my colleague would spin out endless numbers, excuses, market fluctuations, even the weather. The longer he talked, the more people doubted. And yes, eventually the truth came out. The numbers he reported had been inflated. His own words betrayed him before the data ever did. The Stoic philosopher Seneca once said, "He who defends himself with too many words accuses himself in the process." I believe that as much today as 2,000 years ago, because time and silence always stand with the truth. You know, I often tell my patients, you don't need to rush to unmask anyone. Just listen and observe. Let them talk. Truth breathes in silence. Lies suffocate and collapse under their own weight. And let me ask you, have you ever recognized someone's dishonesty just by their long-winded answers? Have you ever felt, even without proof, that their words were hiding something? If so, trust that instinct, but don't react in haste. Use your calmness like a lighthouse, steady shining. Real ships will find you. Fake ones will drift away. Stoics never tell us to respect everyone. They teach us a way of living, to observe without rushing to judge, to stay calm instead of angry, and to let truth itself be the mirror clearer than any accusation. So my dear friend, next time you hear someone talking too much, painting too heavily, pause. Sit quietly. Observe. You will see the truth reveal itself without arguments, without anger. And in that moment, you will feel the true power of a Stoic mind, calm, clear, and unshakable. When the mask slips, reading the body and the face. My dear friend, I want you to imagine this. Someone looks at you and says, "I'm so happy for you." But their smile flickers like a passing cloud, disappearing before it ever reaches their eyes. Or they say, "Of course I trust you," but their gaze slides away as if the weight of truth is too heavy to carry. Have you ever noticed that contradiction words can be rehearsed, stories can be memorized, but the body does not lie. It always betrays what the heart is carrying. The Stoics called this truth hidden in the details. I remember watching a live interview. A famous athlete was accused of cheating. He denied everything with perfect words, strong tone, absolute confidence. But just before he spoke, his jaw tightened, his eyes blinked more than usual, and his voice jumped a pitch higher. He thought he was controlling the story, but his body was telling a story. And months later, the truth came out exactly as those tiny signals had warned. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, do not just hear what a man says, look at what he does. And sometimes, what he does is nothing more than a frown, a glance, or a heavy sigh. One of my patients, Anne, a woman in her 60s, once told me, Doctor, I asked my son if he was having financial trouble. He quickly answered, no, Mom, everything's fine. But his eyes looked away and his hands twisted together. I knew something wasn't right, and she was correct later. He admitted he was drowning in credit card debt. Anne didn't just listen with her ears, she listened with her eyes. And that helped her support her son before things got worse. You see, truth doesn't live only in words. It hides in the pause before the answer, in the hesitant gaze, in the smile that never reaches the eyes, in the sigh when they think you're not paying attention. So here is your Stoic practice. Next time someone answers you, let a few seconds of silence stretch. Don't nod, don't rush to fill the air. Just observe. Notice the delayed blink, the smile that fades too soon, the sudden change in voice. Because a lie may dress itself in words, but the face is always naked. Seneca once wrote, actions are the mirror of the mind more than words. And when you learn to read that mirror, you no longer fear deception. You'll watch dishonesty the way you'd watch a play on stage, not with anger, but with calm understanding. Because, my dear friend, once you learn to see the mask fall, you hold in your hands a great power, clarity. And that clarity is what protects your soul, helping you walk through a noisy, deceitful world while keeping your inner peace unshaken. The rehearsed script. Why repetition exposes deception? My dear friend, I want you to think back to a small memory. When you tell someone a story from your past, a trip, a family gathering, or a childhood moment, have you noticed how the story is never told exactly the same way? Twice? One time, you remember the color of the sky. Another time, you emphasize how you felt. Or maybe a song that was playing, because real memory, it breathes, is alive. It shifts slightly each time you revisit it, but lies are different. A lie is like pressing play on a recording. It's rehearsed, memorized, and repeated with the same rhythm, the same words every time. It lacks softness, it lacks life. It is rigid like a script. I remember an old colleague many years ago. He once missed an important meeting. When asked, he quickly said, "My car broke down on the way." His answer was firm, without hesitation. But what struck me was that days later, when I casually asked, "So what happened that day? Why were you late?" He repeated the exact same line, word for word, like pressing replay. No additions, no variations, no new details. And I knew right then it was no longer memory. It was a script. The Stoic Seneca once said, "Truth is simple. Lies require rehearsal." And that's exactly right. An honest mind can adapt, shift, and retell with natural variations while still preserving the core essence. But a mind hiding something clings rigidly to one version, terrified that any change will expose a crack. One of my patients, Richard, 72 years old, once shared this lesson. He suspected an old friend of making up stories to borrow money. He told me every time I asked, he repeated the exact same line, "I just need a small amount, I'll pay you back next month." Not one word changed. I heard it so many times, the repetition itself became the proof. And of course, Richard was right. The debt was never repaid. You see, truth is like water, flexible, soft, flowing through any crack while remaining itself. Lies are like a brittle wall, hit it from a different angle and it will break. So here is your practice in conversation. Change the angle. Ask the story in a different way at a different time. An honest person will retell it with small variations, adding or leaving out details, but the essence stays true. A liar, however, panics when the script is lost and their rigid repetition betrays them. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, what is in harmony with nature stands firm, what is forced soon crumbles. Lies are exactly that, force, unnatural, unable to survive the flow of time or the shift of a question. So my friend, pay attention. Don't interrupt too quickly. Just notice how a story is repeated. If it breathes, if it has life, you're hearing truth. But if it's rigid, like a recording on repeat, then you know you're facing a mask. And once you see it, you don't need anger. You don't need to expose them loudly. Your clarity itself is already a victory. The verbal maze. Why liars get lost when the path changes. My dear friend, have you ever walked a road so familiar that you could remember every turn with your eyes closed? But then, one day, that road was blocked and you had to take a new path, and suddenly you felt confused, disoriented, maybe even lost? That's exactly how liars react when their story is pushed off the script they prepared. Truth is flexible. It's like water. You might ask, how did you get home after the party? An honest person will recall naturally, I drove across the bridge, stopped at the red light, then stopped for gas. Another time they might add, I remember the radio was playing an old song I love. The details may change, but the story still flows alive like water. But lies are different. Lies are rigid, like a piece of wood. Push them in a new direction and they snap. A person inventing a false script cannot adapt. Ask them about an unprepared detail and they stumble or even get angry. I remember once during an internal company investigation, an employee was suspected of losing some documents. He insisted I left them in the office after the meeting. Seemed believable. But when a colleague casually asked, was it the office on the second floor or the third, he froze, then quickly tried to change the subject. Why does that matter? I already told you. And in that moment, everyone understood this wasn't memory, it was a script. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, what stands with nature stands firm. What is forced soon crumbles. Lies are forced. They cannot bend. They cannot survive when the path changes. I recall one of my older patients, James, 68 years old. He told me about a nephew who often made up stories to borrow money. Once James asked, you need money for car repairs. When did it break down? The young man replied, quickly last week on my way to work. A few days later, James asked again, so where exactly did the car break down? The nephew stammered, near home. But why are you asking so much? And right then, James knew the truth had surfaced. You see, liars usually only prepare for direct questions. But when you change the angle, when you lead them into a verbal maze with one unexpected detail, they get lost. So here is your practice next time you doubt someone. Don't attack or confront. Just ask one small, natural follow-up question. The honest will answer with ease. The liar will stumble inside the maze they created. And when you notice this, you don't need anger. You don't need to expose anyone, just observe. Because truth can pass through any gate. But lies, they are always dead ends. My dear friend, when you learn to listen, to observe, and to ask gentle but precise questions, you'll realize something. Liars never need you to unmask them. They unmask themselves. And that is the moment as a Stoic, you keep your calm, your clarity, and walk out of the maze, leaving them trapped in their own deceit. The reverse, blade, testing, loyalty with a harmless lie. My dear friend, have you ever felt uneasy in a relationship you want to trust, but somewhere deep inside, there's a shadow of doubt? Is this person truly on your side? Do they really deserve the trust you've given them? In moments like these, sometimes the clearest path is not direct confrontation, for the quiet test. The ancients called it the reverse blade. You don't strike outward. Instead, you hand the blade to another and see what they do with it. I remember an old colleague of mine. He suspected a close friend of gossiping behind his back. Instead of confronting him, he whispered a small, harmless detail. "I'm thinking of moving to another city." He told no one else, yet within days, the whole office was buzzing about his big move. That single piece of dust had blown into a storm, and the false friend revealed himself. You see, no arguments, no accusations were needed. A single harmless detail was enough to reveal loyalty or betrayal. Marcus Aurelius once said, "The flatterer is more dangerous than the open enemy." At least with the enemy, you see the spear. A false friend, on the other hand, smiles at you while stabbing you with whispers, and sometimes the only way to see clearly is to give them the chance to reveal themselves. I also remember a patient, Margaret, age 66. She told me about someone in her close circle of friends who always seemed overly caring, but she sensed something was off. One day, she casually shared a small harmless detail. "I'm thinking about selling my old car, but I'm not sure yet." Within a week, that tiny detail had turned into gossip embroidered with added drama. Margaret smiled and told me I didn't need further proof. I knew exactly who spread it. My friend, this is the power of the reverse blade. You don't attack, you don't need anger or revenge. You simply plant a harmless seed and watch patiently. If that seed grows into gossip, you already know who cannot be trusted. And remember, Stoicism teaches us the purpose is not revenge, not to humiliate anyone. The purpose is clarity, to know who truly deserves to walk beside you. So here is your practice. Next time you doubt someone, don't rush to accuse. Hand them a single thread, a harmless detail, something only they know. Then wait. If that thread returns to you from another mouth, you already have your answer. The Stoics believed an open enemy is easy to face, but a false friend is the real test. Only with disciplined calm and clear eyes can you protect your inner peace. Because liars, my dear friend, always dig their own hole. You don't need to push them in, just observe and then walk away, keeping your peace intact. Controlled confession. When vulnerability becomes a mirror. My dear friend, there is a subtle truth about human nature. We often reflect what is given to us. When someone opens up, most of us respond with openness of our own. And liars are no exception. But here's the difference. With an honest person, sharing builds connection. With a deceiver, your sharing becomes a license for them to expose themselves. And that's when you see their hidden nature. I remember one autumn morning sitting in a small cafe near the hospital. I tried something the Stoics called a controlled confession. I told a colleague I suspected wasn't entirely honest. You know, when I was younger, sometimes I exaggerated my achievements just to feel more confident. But afterward, I always regretted it. I hadn't even finished when he nodded eagerly, his eyes lighting up as if he had found an ally. He leaned in and whispered, "Actually, me too. Just last week, I told the boss I'd finished a project when I hadn't even started." You see, I didn't need to accuse or confront. I simply opened a small door and he walked right through, confessing something he never would have if I'd asked directly. Marcus Aurelius once reminded us observe people not just by their words, but by how they respond to the smallest fragments of life. And sometimes a harmless, controlled confession is that fragment that reveals the truth. One of my patients, Eleanor, age 72, told me a very similar story. She suspected a neighbor of twisting stories about her. Instead of confronting, she casually said during a chat, "Sometimes I forget to answer the phone, then pretend I was busy so I don't have to talk." The neighbor immediately laughed and admitted, "Me too. I've made up excuses many times just to avoid helping others." Eleanor told me I didn't need to ask anything else. Just listening was enough to know how much I could trust her. My friend, this is the lesson Stoicism leaves us. Use controlled vulnerability as a mirror. You don't need to reveal real secrets, just a safe, harmless detail true enough to open a door. The honest will respond with empathy. The deceitful will see it as a chance to reveal their true face. And remember, this is not self-harm. You don't confess anything that could be used against you. If needed, you can invent a small harmless weakness. What matters is not the content, but the other person's reaction. Seneca once wrote, "The one who pretends to open his heart is often the first to betray yours." So when you open a small door, watch carefully who steps through and how. Because sometimes just one fragile reaction tells you more than months of watching.